Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can find out more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers like Pepsi and Instacart build retail media and product detail page content faster than ever before at itsrapid.ai.
Welcome back to Beyond the Shelf. Today, we are thrilled to have Bryan Gildenberg, our very first guest from back in August 2023, returning to the show. Bryan is the managing director at Retail Cities, where he focuses on urban retail development and strategy. He's also the founder and CEO of Confluencer Commerce, a firm dedicated to helping clients navigate the ever-evolving retail landscape. Previously, he served as Senior Vice President of Commerce at Omnicom Retail Group and spent over 2 decades at Kantar Consulting as Chief Knowledge Officer. Bryan is a renowned expert in retail insights and strategy, a leading voice in the world of e-commerce, and a sought-after speaker. Please enjoy Dave's conversation with Bryan Gildenberg.
All right. My friend Bryan Gildenberg is with us today on Beyond the Shelf. Bryan, when was the last time we got together for a podcast recording?
I think according to my sources, which was you 5 minutes ago, I think it was about 18 months ago.
18 months.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the beginnings of your podcasting journey. So
I can't thank you enough, by the way, for being an early guest. Thank you for that.
Well, I think it was best that you had me on when you had no listeners. I think that was a very solid idea.
Bryan, would you catch us up? What have you been up to lately? And then I've got a whole range of topics I want to ask you about.
Well, apart from alienating your listeners, let's see. Right now, most of my life is spent as the managing director of Retail Cities, which is a retail research firm dedicated to helping companies, retailers, brands, and the people that work with them, what we call predict, map, and capture the next $10 trillion of retail growth around the world. So nobody realizes there's going to be $10 trillion of retail growth around the world. And, one of the things we try to do is help our clients who are largely brands and agencies figure out how to structure, how to align, how to strategize, what the right questions are to ask about where growth is going to come from and how to get after it. So that's a big one. We ran our Growth Map event in Chicago last November. That was cool. And then also in my spare time, I also run my own sort of advisory practice called Confluencer Commerce. And most of what I do there is work with mostly in that practice, mostly third parties who are involved in the retail media and marketing ecosystem. I like to pick companies kind of like you, Dave, that are wiring things together in ways that they weren't wired together before. Because I think that as we look at the confluence, which is where the name comes from, of retail media and content, as all of those things collapse on each other, there are businesses that are kind of, I think, at the nexus of that confluence in some interesting ways. So I'm on Bazaar Voices Executive Advisory Board because I think they're doing some interesting wiring, certainly between the user-generated content and commerce ecosystem. I did a lot of work last year with Smart Commerce, the folks that are that commerce enable a lot of particularly social media feeds, and then a couple of other new clients coming soon to a theater near you. So
I like it. Never a dull moment. Sounds like you're keeping busy. 10 trillion is What's a big that? Number. I said 10 trillion is a big number.
Yeah, it's not small. So if you forecast the 27 trillion of retail growth today, that'll basically grow at about 3 or 4% a year. That gets you to 37 trillion pretty quickly. So that's the idea. Now, of that 10 trillion, about 3 trillion of it's going to come from the US. So over the next 5 years. So that's our about 30. The US is about 25% of everything that's bought and sold in the world will be about 30% of the growth. So,
Bryan, we're fresh off CES. By the time of this,
where there were 10 trillion people, apparently,
where there were 10 trillion people. By the time this episode goes live, we'll also have NRF well underway.
Yes.
What are you looking at? What are you seeing that's interesting?
Well, I think One, I didn't go to CES. I am going to NRF for a variety of reasons. But I think it's interesting to look at those two events kind of juxtapose one versus the other, given that CES has such a strong retail media presence anymore. And I think, I think this is going to be one of the interesting conversations we're going to be having in 2025. I did a predictions document for my friends at Smart Commerce, where we had kind of 5 big predictions for 2025, one of which was about retail media. And I think that increasingly, and, I think the world of Kara Pratt and the retail media is media concept that her and others have been pushing on, I think was logical, sensible, appropriate, and necessary for the retail media ecosystem to grow. But I think right now, the idea that you have one meeting where all the retail media people are, and then another meeting where none of the retail media people are, but all of the retail people are, I don't know that's going to help anybody going forward. I think the notion that retail media is a media asset that is completely and utterly independent of retail makes no sense. I think the idea that I saw something, 1 million people have posted this, like from a media point of view. It's like, well, purchase data is the holy grail. It's like, well, unless you're a pretty specific type of religious, or you think the Indiana Jones films were documentaries, the holy grail is a myth. Like, it's not, we don't aim for the holy grail, right? And I think this idea that somehow there's going to be, one ring to rule them all and one ring to find them and bind them in the media world, I don't think it makes sense. And I think that for most retailers, they're going to have to right-size their ambitions in retail media in a way that I think will really help them over time. And I'd be curious for your point of view on this, because you see the commerce side of this and many things you do. But for most retail media networks that don't have national scale, the most interesting thing about them, yes, it's their first-party data, but it's the actual sales that take place that the first-party data is measuring. It's like, and the person that cares the most about that, working for a large advertiser, generally speaking, is somebody who's responsible for the commercial outcome at that retailer. And I think this idea that a lot of these medium-sized retail media networks need to have standalone media importance that is outside of that commercial outcome, I just don't think that makes any sense. And I think we're all going to realize that. And so one of the predictions that we had is I think that a lot of retail media in 2025 and beyond, not the majority of the dollars, because the majority of the dollars are Amazon, but the majority of the networks will probably be managed more the way that something like shopper marketing is managed today, and less the way that programmatic media is. And I think that as a result, the increasing disconnect between retail media and retail, I find worrying. So, and I don't know that it's good for the overall ecosystem. So that's my thought.
And when you say more like shopper marketing, more account-based?
Well, just more, I think, I'm old enough to remember when nobody knew what shopper marketing was. And I remember the way that it evolved, which is that all of a sudden marketers got interested in retail because it's a theater in which they could do brand equity work as well as the tawdry commercial business of selling things that was largely governed by the account team through trade marketing and promotions. So shopper marketing grew up as a way to basically do smarter stuff than discounting, but at the shelf. And that's eventually what it evolved into. And that was great. And look, if you've been part of the shopper marketing world for a while, you will know that every 2 or 3 years, your company reorganizes it. Every 2 or 3 years, there's a giant bun fight within the organization about what budget it comes from and who does what and who pays for it. And is it brand or is it trade or how is it managed? And every 5 years, McKinsey comes in and tells you to do it differently, and you do it differently. That's what retail media is going to be. It's going to be one of these things that just kind of bounces around a little bit. It's never perfect. And that there's no one way to solve the problem. That's what it's going to turn into. It's going to turn into something that looks like the way companies manage shopper marketing today for most accounts. For Amazon, I think that's a different issue. And I think increasingly for Walmart, that's a different issue. Kroger, though obviously now has less of an argument for this than they might have a month ago, as a national platform, post the denouement of the Albertsons saga. I think Kroger's got enough of a national footprint where it makes sense, and Roundel is the other, and a couple of the other ones. But for the most part, these are going to be assets that are interesting, mostly to people that are trying to sell things within that retail environment. And that embracing that would be really awesome. So, and then you could start to do cool stuff where I've got an integrated commerce, shopper, digital, in-store, and I'm putting the retail back in retail media, for lack of a better term.
I like it. Now, just to parse apart the Amazon, Walmart, and Kroger, Target, let's say some of the larger retailers in space, that's because of their scale and the footprint and all of that.
Well, and that gets me to one of the other predictions I made, which is like, look, scale is back, and as a competitive advantage. And I think we've spent most of the 21st century cloud computing, for the most part, enabled small businesses to get after the same degree of information that large businesses had without needing the CapEx to have to invest in the technology to support it. And as a result, some of the inherent advantages of being small, some of the inherent disadvantages of being small, rather, were offset by that type of model. And then the advantages of being small had an opportunity to shine as competitive advantage. I don't think the next 20 years are that story. I think the next, certainly 5 years, I think are a story about how scale really effing matters again. And if you look at the tech companies that are driving the world today, if you look at the companies that are driving the stock market, if you look at the retail businesses today that are by and large the most successful in the US, they're big ones. They're massive. And I do think that there is something about the way AI investment works, which is that if I'm going to do something differentiated in it, I can't just do that with an off-the-shelf application or with a cloud-based application. I need capital. I need money. I need muscle. I need time. I need bandwidth. I think all of these things are going to create an ecosystem where scale really matters. And I think that from a commerce point of view, it's going to put Amazon and Walmart, well, Amazon in its own bucket. You and I have talked about this before. I think Amazon's been in its own bucket for years. I don't think it's like anything else. But it's going to put Walmart, I think, in a very different bucket than everybody else. And I think it puts Kroger in a different bucket. The interesting one, of course, is Costco. It's a bigger retailer than Kroger that is starting to adapt some of the technological capabilities that other retailers have leaned in on way more aggressively than they have. And this is not a knock on Costco. They just haven't needed to. But they are starting to lean on retail media. They are starting to lean in on digital technology. I think they'll be an interesting one to watch. But I think those retailers are going to look really different than most of the other retailers in the world. I think brands that sell to those retailers are going to need to embrace a dramatically different account team structure for these businesses. It's going to look a little bit more like how different Walmart used to look 25 years ago or 20 years ago versus other retailers, given the capabilities that Walmart had. You're going to have 3 or 4 gigantic customers that look really different than everything else. I think scale is going to get way more competitive advantage over the next 24 to 36 months than it may have done in the previous 20 years for companies. So just because I think the nature of what you need to get good at requires money and capital now in a way that it didn't before.
So for the big retailers, perhaps more clear what happens there. Let's say you're one of these really large brands. How does that help you, or how should a big CPG be thinking about scale?
I think big brands have places where they have businesses that can deploy capital against that makes sense, right? So whether it's capital to develop your own unique approach to AI, your own unique training models. And then, one of the most interesting things that came out of CES was Jensen Huang's opening remarks, the CEO of NVIDIA, where he basically talked about there's a whole third type of because everybody knows in AI, not everybody, but in AI, basically you need to train AI and then you need to get crap out of it, which is inferencing, right? So you need to put stuff in and get stuff out. He was talking about a whole third type of computing, which is basically the virtual world in which you're really going to train AI in. So you're going to train AI, you're going to start training AI in the real world, but that's expensive. Because the amount of compute that takes is enormous. You're then going to do most of the fine tuning of the teaching of AI in a virtual world where it's way less compute to be able to do that, but you need to be able to afford one of those virtual worlds.
To start.
And that's where, and again, I think you're just getting to a point where capital is just going to matter a lot more. So if I'm a big brand, what I want to look at are one, where can I deploy capital against a problem that's going to build me a sustainable competitive advantage? And that's either going to be in information. The other really big piece is clearly an automated labor or robotics. Robotics take capital. There's no cloud robot right now. So, I can't do a timeshare on a robot that picks stuff for me. So I need that, I need physical stuff in a physical place. That physical stuff today is expensive. And that's what I would do. The other thing is, and this is a dictum I've used for a while with larger clients. I remember one very large CPG company, we'll keep anonymous, working with them over the years, where they were like, we're buying up all these small companies, and we're going to learn to be nimble and fast and responsive, just like these small businesses. I'm like, no, you're not. That's stupid. What? You're not going to do that. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You're a multi-billion-dollar company. You're never going to outspeed a company where all the decision makers get together in a room. Get together in a room every day and make decisions. That's not what you're good at, right? But what you got to exploit the advantage that you have, which is that you can afford to screw up. The way I always used to put this is that, if I'm a big company today, my smaller competitors make decisions better than I do and faster.
Yeah.
What they stink at, you may relate to this. What small companies tend to stink at is choices. So and the hardest thing is, as an entrepreneur to do is to choose not to do something.
Yeah.
Because the opportunity comes up, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do that. And what a big company can do is they can force a small company to choose, which they won't do. They'll inevitably try to play both hands at the same time with a small staff, and they'll end up out of money really fast. Like, as the way I always put this, like, look, small companies are really, really good at making decisions. They suck at choices. So what you want to do is make every decision, they make a choice. And you've got to put them in that competitive position. You've got to aggressively compete with these businesses, not by trying to be what they are, but be what you are, but hit them from multiple sides. So if you look at, I think P&G did an interesting job of this over the years, where they would get after emerging brands with both a premium proposition and a value one, and in categories, and just go, okay, choose. Like, you figure out which one of these you want to get after, because you can't do both. So, and I think increasingly the ability to know an audience is going to require a level of granularity that goes beyond, I'm a small brand with 4,000 followers. I know those 4,000 people really well, but you're going to need to know where they are and when they are and how to reach them at different points in the journey and all that stuff. And that just takes scale and technology and analytics and money and partners. And I think big companies are well positioned to do that.
So now the $64 million question, or maybe it's the $6,400 question. If I'm a small brand and I'm getting into the market, I've got social media, I can be scrappy. What else can I do in the face of those companies with the capital?
I think you have to do the thing that great retailers learned how to do 10, 15 years ago, which is that every retailer said, we really know our customers. Our people make all the difference, and we really know our customers. When data came along that allowed small companies to use cloud computing to really know customers, there were some companies like Kroger that went and really knew their customer. And then there were some retailers that weren't Kroger that didn't do that just said they knew their customer. They ran into trouble. I think for small companies today, we're going to say, well, we've got this, this group of passionate followers. Well, you've got to know as much about that passionate follower as you think you do. And I think it's going to require the great small brands of the world are going to understand their product market fit uniquely well. They're going to be, and I think they're going to have more expertise in product than they have in the past. And I think it's going to be harder to do some of the just slap a name on it, source it from China and sell it kind of stuff. I think you're going to need real expertise, but then you're going to really need to understand the market. And when you understand the market, what you're really understanding is where your product fits in the lives of your consumers and how they're using new information sources to learn and converse with the area that you're involved in, right? So a product that relieves hangovers, right? I not only need to know how those people drink, but I need to understand how they're getting input about not drinking. I need to understand how I'm part of that conversation. So that if they're doing dry January, how do I meet them where they are in that journey? How do I understand how that works? So I always think of my friend Brooks Powell and Cheers, and I'm thinking like his brand Cheers. When I think of a small startup, it just conjures up in my head. But that's an interesting one to look at, right? Or just any brand like that. Where do you fit into that person's lives so that the content that you're thinking of attaching your messaging to, or that you're generating yourself, or that your users are generating, that I've got that all kind of organized and orchestrated so that I'm a bigger part of I'm a real part of those people's lives in a way, or that I understand those lives really, really well. Because I think this notion that just because I'm small, I know my customer, that's going to become much more complicated. And then the other thing you want to have is absolute mastery of how social media, algorithmically driven content, assuming that TikTok survives, by the time this is posted, I think we'll have some idea as to whether TikTok will still be a thing in the US. But certainly feed-driven content that gets to you through some sort of content-powered algorithm, I need to understand that. And then the other thing I'm clearly going to need to understand is as search increasingly gets replaced by generative AI, how my products show up and come to life in that environment. So and even on Amazon, that's becoming important today because you've got Cosmo, their contextual search engine that they're using, which is AI powered. It's basically like the back end of Rufus. But it's probably a more interesting application of the technology that Amazon's built for that than Rufus is on the front end. So
more to come. So you can stand out as a small brand. That's the good news.
Yeah.
It's going to take some work, of course, to do it.
Yeah.
But there is an opportunity. Speaking of content and content strategy, rules of the road, words of wisdom for 2025.
But look, I'd be curious for your take on this too, because I think the AI world may have overpromised and will be underdelivering a little bit from a content point of view here. I think I've told you this before, but about a year ago, I registered the URL artisanalcontent.com, which I am convinced someday someone is going to start an agency called artisanalcontent.com, by humans for humans. It's going to be like the organic vegetables of content.
Non-algorithmic.
Yeah, non-AI generated, built by humans for humans. Yeah. And I think right now, I think the early returns, and look, I have my 16-year-old son here as a focus group here, but he used to use a lot of the Discord AI stuff to draw his monsters for Dungeons and Dragons, but it just all got kind of samey for him. So, I think he's been a little bit dissatisfied with the RO0I that he's putting in on that. I don't know right now that I think there's some really exciting things you can do from an AI point of view around the potential to do content variants relatively easily. And now this is really your world, right? So, I mean, you were years ago, you figured out that the ability to vary the same idea across multiple platforms was something people were going to need to do.
You got to do it.
Yeah. I think minor content variations, I think AI can be really good at. I think assuming that AI is going to generate anything beyond that is complicated. So, I don't know what your experience or take is on that, but I also think that AI tends to, obviously, the more complex the content, the worse the AI gets. So that's the other piece I've seen. But what do you think?
Yeah. No, listen, for optimizing, for streamlining the workflow, analysis, it's great. We've seen a ton of usage at It's Rapid around those use cases. We want to change it up, change the voice, customize it for a specific channel, retailer. For tech, certainly does a great job. I was talking with one of our customers who said, that's great, but how do I do it at scale? Right. I need to do that for 1,000, 5,000 products, and I need to do it all the time. Then you got to have a whole workflow and review and all that.
The workflow thing, because I remember I was talking to a client about this at Grocery Shop last year. And the person's like, look, I can generate 10,000 images tomorrow for a campaign. He goes, still only got one lawyer. I mean, like, I can't get these things approved. Like, I've got 9,999 images that are just sitting in an approval file somewhere that can't, that'll never see the light of day, but I can generate them. I feel really smart. But
so I got to have a workflow to manage it. I think I
think some of the really specific applications from an AI point of view that are around around relatively small bore optimization of very specific tasks. Mm-hmm. And I think for all the talk about the ability that AI is going to that AI has to transform things, I think AI is going to transform things. The way Amazon tends to think about technology innovation, which is through what Jassy calls primitives. So and Amazon's whole philosophy on this, and this can frustrate the bleep out of you if you're trying to work with Amazon on stuff, because these people don't talk to each other. But it's like, look, I'm going to get a 2-pizza team, to use the Amazon phrase, to fix one very specific problem. And we're going to do that one very specific thing really, really well. It's like the guiding principle behind software, as you well know. Like, trying to solve 2 problems with software is not 2 times as complicated as solving one. It's 4 times. Trying to solve 3 problems is 16 times as complicated as solving one. So solve for one thing that works really, really well, then build the next thing, then hope you can integrate them. So,
or someone else will integrate them.
Yeah, right. Somebody will come along
and put them together. Yeah.
So, and I think AI is going to work a lot like that. Shout out to my good friend Michael Stick at Court Avenue. But Stick explained to me this once. He goes, look, training AI is a lot like training a dog. He's like, you don't train a dog to sit, roll over, and fetch at the same time. Like,
it's do one.
It's sit, treat, sit, treat, sit, treat, sit, pet, sit, pet, sit. Then you move on to rollover. And I think that's actually a pretty good metaphor for the type of work that I see really being effective in AI, is bringing it to bear on relatively small bore problems, where the automation can have enough impact that all of a sudden I can leave that and let it go. I think the other thing with AI that I think is going to become increasingly clear in 2025 is that the fact that it needs to be trained, the fact that it does better with a well-defined job, the fact that governance is a big part of it, the fact that it kind of stinks early on and needs to learn, the fact that it's mostly going to be in a bandwidth of performance, and it's going to take exceptional training to make it exceptional. I haven't said one thing so far that doesn't make AI sound more like an employee than a technology. And I really do think that the way to think about AI in 2025 is not to think about like a tech implementation, but to think about it like you're building a new type of cross-functional team.
It's part of the team.
It's part of the team. And then you think about, okay, well, what are the icebreakers we do? Well, we can't bring AI to the bar and put it on a mechanical bull. But what we can do is I think hackathons are going to be the new pizza parties, right? Like where you're going to get to know your teammate. You're going to get to know your AI, right? Like you're going to ask it a bunch of questions. By the way, it'll get to know you as I've discovered. You can teach Perplexity or ChatGPT to write like you. Like I was I was on a plane and I was walking to the bathroom, and I saw some woman who was literally having a conversation with ChatGPT about how to write a performance review for somebody. And she was asking a question. It's like, well, doesn't this sound weird? And ChatGPT's like, yeah, it does sound a little weird. Why don't you try this? And it was just a really interesting application of what you're going to be able to do. But it was really like bouncing it off. It was like bouncing it off your HR team.
By the way, this feedback loop with AI, I do find that really interesting. We've added that recently to some of our product lineup, and you can start with one thing and go do the feedback, and you get to the endpoint you want.
Yeah, my favorite thing about ChatGPT is they discovered it gives you crappier answers in December because it knows no one cares. So it's actually learned to give shorter, less descriptive answers in December because everybody's mailing it in over the holidays. I think that's
great. Gosh, that is a great one.
Never want any evidence that it's an employee. That's it. So,
Bryan, I want to wrap up with omnichannel commerce. Is this the year? We've been hearing about consolidation of e-com and commerce, and now it's all commerce. But is 2025 the year that it all really comes together?
No. I mean, it'll continue. I think like many things, this is an evolution, not a we've made it. It's either like painting the Golden Gate Bridge or one of those tricks where it says you'll be amazed on the journey when you're halfway there. It's like, well, I don't know when the journey ends, so I don't know when I'm halfway. But thanks. Pick your metaphor. But this is a journey, not an
endpoint.
Yeah, the thrill really is in the ride. I certainly think that retailers are getting more omnichannel in terms of how they think. I do think you're going to see a real divide in this, though. I'd be curious for your take on this. In the retailers like Walmart and Amazon that have the critical mass from a traffic point of view, omnichannel strategy for those retailers is going to look really different than it does for retailers that don't have a third-party marketplace. So if I think about everything, even basic stuff like category definition, I think that just looks really different in a retailer where I've got third-party competitors versus first-party competitors. Like if I look at, I was doing a search for like a coat rack on Walmart.com versus Target. The price points you see for that product are just completely different because of the third-party marketplace on Walmart versus it's not Walmart's prices per se. The price they have on an individual coat rack isn't that different than Target's. It's the categories really different because the third-party sellers have a very different range of price points. So I think that omnichannel is going to look really different at Walmart than it does at other retailers as a result of that third-party marketplace. But I think increasingly, yes, I think that I think most retailers are getting better at understanding at a basic level the role of the store versus the role of digital. It's still really hard to pull together what those, like even just the simple things like drawing a planogram, right? Like building a shelf set, like there's still not, our dear friend Ann Zabowski at Circana is working on trying to help people solve for this problem right now. But there's still not a great way for most companies to pipe e-commerce data into the process of building a planogram. So, but if I'm selling out of a Publix store that's got a 30% Instacart sales rate, right, or something like that, I still don't know how to planogram that store differently than the Publix store down the road that's, serving a retirement community that's a 4% Instacart pickup rate. I still don't know how to use the data to be able to do even something that rudimentary and different. So yeah, I think we'll continue on the journey there. I think the definition of omnichannel is going to change though. And because so much of commerce is going to increasingly be content centered rather than retail centered, I think we're all going to master the balancing act between the .com business and the physical store business just in time for there to be a whole different set of problems. So that's why I think it's a journey. I think companies are all getting better at this stuff, to be honest. I think they're all making progress. And I think the notion that the stick that, anybody trying to sell you an omnichannel solution will beat you up with is you're not truly omnichannel. Well, I don't really know that that's the point. Just get better. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of just getting better.
Bryan, we've covered a lot of great topics today, from retail media to AI, content strategy. What's on your reading list? What podcasts are you listening to? Where do you find the inspiration?
Right now, the book I'm reading, which I can never remember the name of, is the new Nate Silver book that he just wrote. I think it's called On Risking It All, which is it's Nate Silver. So, your mileage will vary depending on your attitude towards quirky quantitative people. But I think for all of that, it's an interesting discussion around people that look at the world in a quantitative way, what he calls basically what he calls the river versus what he calls the village, which is sort of the collective groupthink that governed a lot of what I might just call, what might be called vaguely liberal discourse, and how that sense of groupthink has created a unique opportunity for people that see the world differently. And those can be highly quantitative, intelligent people. Those can be people that have a different type of intelligence, like a Donald Trump. Like there's a lot of opportunity to bust groupthink for people that find themselves outside of the groupthink. And I'm reading the chapters that he wrote. He was interviewing Sam Bankman-Fried while Sam Bankman-Fried was committing heinous felonies. So he was doing a series of interviews with him. So it's a fascinating portrait of what's good about that quantitative worldview, but also where it gets really, really weird. So that's been interesting. The podcast, I'll I'll do a shout out to something I picked up from somebody. I can't remember who. I tried something for the first time they called Podcast Pro. It is you go in to the app, you choose your news topics, and it immediately creates a 20-minute podcast like the New York Times Daily or whatever it is, all customized to what you've selected. And it's all, as far as I can tell, it's all AI generated. So it's AI voice actors that they've enabled to do this stuff. And it's both unnervingly accurate and hilarious in its attempts to be human. Like, it throws a lot of you-knows in to appeal to millennials, I guess, but they come at really weird contextual times, like talking about disasters and fires and wars. So they got some bugs to work out, but I thought it was interesting. So I thought that was inspiring, if for no other reason than to understand the art of the possible, because in 5 seconds, after selecting the topics I would hear about, a 20-minute audio podcast was produced for me that had a series of chapters I could opt in or opt out. It was pretty interesting. I think the other podcasts, the other content ecosystem that I'm a huge admirer of, and I know some of my friends are as well, is the Spotify platform, The Ringer, that was started by Bill Simmons, the sports and pop culture podcast. I think the way that they have diversified themselves into a variety of things with kind of a commonality of point of view, which is a little bit founder driven, but I think it's been interesting to watch. It's an interesting study in how a founder has permeated a point of view into a platform. So I find, and as I've been a long time admirer of Bill Simmons and the work that they do. And a lot of what we try to do at Kantar was kind of inspired by some of what that team was doing in other places. So I just think it's if anybody's a pop culture, sports, or entertainment fan, the Ringer podcast network is definitely worth checking out. But I think it's an interesting business construct. It's now owned by Spotify. But it's just interesting. I think Spotify in general is a fascinating company. We could talk about some other time. So.
For our next podcast, Bryan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Always a pleasure. If our listeners want to find you online at Confluencer Commerce or elsewhere, what's the best way for them to do that?
Usually just follow me on LinkedIn. That's where most of my stuff is, or the Retail Cities LinkedIn feed. So also a good follow for content from me. So those are my spots.
Thanks, Bryan.
Dave, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to chat to you.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Sierra Nevada, Revlon, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.